The Met's commissioner has defended his officers over the arrest of 6 anti-monarchy protesters early on Coronation Day, although Sir Mark Rowley did admit it had all been unfortunate. One of the group, Graham Smith, said he would be considering legal action against Scotland Yard, while critics of the government's controversial changes to the Public Order Act said it showed that new police powers were much too broad. Here's our political reporter, Serena Barker-Singh.
These are perhaps not the images of the coronation Britain had hoped to project. The news of 64 arrests beamed around the world. But today, the government backed the police using new powers, given just days before the king was crowned. Ministers insisting there were legitimate threats.
This intelligence picture included more than one plot to cause severe disruption by placing activated rape alarms in the path of horses to induce a stampede, and a separate plot to douse participants in the procession with paint.
The new Metropolitan Police Commissioner brought in to reform a forcing crisis, in a letter today criticised the ill-informed commentary, insisting protest was not banned, and even described how crowds had actually applauded and cheered as they made 17 arrests in the Mall.
A lot of questions remain over many of the arrests, and the Met haven't actually apologised yet. They say they regret that 6 protesters couldn't attend the demo, but there are questions over others. 2 women were working as part of an overnight safety team. They were arrested, and others were held for over 16 hours.
We were going to appear in yellow, so we made ourselves known. We gave a place where we were going to be. We told them exactly what we were going to do. They'd okayed it, and okayed it all the way up until the day before. Actually, peaceful demonstration has been attacked under the guise of authoritarian draconian laws. That's what's happened here.
And that was before the coronation?
Yeah, this was before.
But it wasn't just protesters caught up in arrests. Documentary maker Rich Felgate was filming activists in Whitehall when he was arrested, then held for 18 hours without explanation.
I showed the police my press accreditation immediately, but they still proceeded to arrest me. I think it's kind of a recipe for disaster when police are given such wide-ranging powers. With the new public order bill, if you cycle to a protest and have a bike lock, then you could be arrested.
The public wants not to have its life disrupted, but there's a distinction between the right to protest and the right to disrupt. And this bill doesn't make enough of that distinction. It also doesn't lay down strictly enough the guidelines for the way the police interpret it. So I think it needs to be considered, probably not by the government, but by the Select Committee of the House of Commons.
It criminalises peaceful protest in a way which hasn't been done before.
And MPs had previously been warned of the potential overreach with the new police powers within this Public Order Act.
The police don't ignore the signals that come to them from Parliament and from government. I mean, for a start, they have to use the laws, and they have to enforce laws which are given to them by Parliament for a start. So if there are lots of laws coming down the track which criminalise what used to be seen as an inevitable part of protest, things like peaceful disruption, things like people being very noisy, then the police will, it's no surprise that the police will actually try and enforce that.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has also raised his concerns, asking for a review and urgent clarity on why Republic activists were detained for so long. Those arrested say they're waiting for a full apology first.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative MP Sir Charles Walker, who's a critic of the government's Public Order Act, and I began by asking him how he felt about what happened at the weekend.
So I warned when we criminalised protest during COVID that this would have ramifications long into the future. And we saw those at the weekend with legitimate protesters. And by the way, I don't agree with their protest, but I entirely endorse their right to protest, being shut down by the police. And I don't really blame the police for that. I blame politicians for putting our police in that really difficult and invidious position.
Well, what is it that was wrong about the law?
So basically, I mean, the law has de facto turned protest from a right into a freedom. And once it's a freedom, you can restrict freedoms and take them away. And a peaceful protest, albeit a noisy protest, is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. It's something I entirely endorse. Yes, it would have been raucous and distracting, and some people would have found it annoying. But ultimately, that's the price, the very small price we pay to live in a free and open society. I just would say this, it's all very well the Labour Party bleating about this now, but during the COVID lockdowns, they went through the division lobby every single time with the government to criminalise protest. And when I and others raised these concerns, we were ridiculed both by our own benches, but also by the Labour benches.
Well, and Keir Starmer is saying today that he doesn't yet think that the law necessarily needs to be dramatically changed. It may just be a question of guidance. When you see Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, defending his officers and saying, you know, they've tackled a difficult job well, what do you think?
Because we put the police in this position. During lockdown, I intervened in the arrest of some elderly protester who was being bundled into the back of the police wagon. Yes, I remonstrated with the police as politely as I could, but I also made the point on the floor of the House of Commons that it was us as politicians who'd placed the Metropolitan Police on that occasion in such a difficult position. I mean, I believe that protest is an absolute right. I was born with the right to protest. I now accept that what happened during COVID, and I sadly accept it, that what happened during COVID with the criminalisation of protest, that protest has morphed into a freedom. And as I've said, freedoms can be taken away and restricted. So we are where we are because politicians on both sides of the House allowed it to happen.
Do you think, if you're right that, you know, we no longer have a right to protest, that we are a different country now as a result of it?
Well, we became a different country during the COVID lockdowns. Politicians played to the fear of the public. The public wanted a degree of authoritarianism. But some of us recognise that once governments have taken new powers, they tend to want to hold on to them and exercise them, be that a Conservative government or the Labour opposition, whose leader has not said that he will repeal these powers if Labour get into government. He probably will find them quite convenient to deploy against the public as well.
In another 2 years, you won't be in the House to argue these things. Will you be out on the streets?
No, I won't be.
On the barricades?
I think protest is a good thing. I might well go on a protest. I might well make a lot of noise. Clearly, you can see I'm almost now at a loss for words. You do try and sound the alarm, you sound the warnings, but the public, my fellow politicians, were just not in the mood to hear it 2 years ago, and now we're reaping what they sowed, and that makes me very, very sad.
Charles Walker, thank you very much.